John. It's towards the back of your Bible. I'm reading the entire letter. The elder, to the chosen lady and to children whom I love in the truth, and not I only, but also all who know the truth, because of the truth which lives in us and will be with us forever. Grace, mercy, and peace from God the Father and from Jesus Christ, the Father's Son, will be with us in truth and love. It has given me great joy to find some of you children walking in the truth, just as the Father commanded us. And now, dear lady, I'm not writing to you a new command, but one we have had from the beginning. I ask that we love one another, and this is love that we walk in obedience to his commands. As you have heard from the beginning, his command is that you walk in love. Many deceivers who do not acknowledge Jesus Christ as coming into the flesh have gone out in the world. Any such person is the deceiver and the Antichrist. Watch out that you do not lose what you have worked for, but that you may be rewarded fully. Anyone who runs ahead and does not continue in the teaching of Christ does not have God. Whoever continues in the teaching has both the Father and the Son. If anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, do not take him into your house or welcome him. Anyone who welcomes him shares in his wicked work. I have much to write to you, but I do not want to use paper and ink. Instead, I hope to visit you and talk with you face to face, so that our joy may be complete. The children of your chosen sister send their greeting. Now, I am convinced that John is not writing to a person. He's writing to a church. We have to remember that at the time this letter was written, the church was being persecuted. Romans did not care for Christians because Christians did not offer sacrifice to the emperor. And that was not just seen as an act of religion, it was seen as an act of rebellion against the emperor. So, John's writing in code. And instead of saying, hey, I'm writing to the church in such and such place, he says, I'm writing to the lady and her children. Now, why this code? I mean, once you figure out that the mother is the church, and he's talking about how glad he is that members of the church, the lady's children, are being faithful. The code's easy to break. But why this code? Why is John calling the church our mother? And it's interesting, he's not calling the whole church our mother. Catholics do that. In official Catholic doctrine, the church is often referred to as Holy Mother the Church. And it comes from here. But John isn't referring to the whole church. He's referring to a congregation, a local church, kind of like us. How is this church like our mother? Well, I think there's only a handful of you whose mothers actually came to this church. So we can't say, well, some of you, yes, that's true. For most of us, that's not true. But spiritually, we were given birth by a local church. Jesus said you have to be born again. We are born again through grace, by grace, through Christ. But I would venture that every one of us came to know Christ and to ask for that grace through the work of a church. Whether it was Sunday school, whether it was church camp that the church sent you to, whether it was a traveling evangelist that the church invited to come and speak at a revival meeting, whether it was just hearing the pastor speak for many, many times and finally asking God into your life yourself. It was through a church that you were born again. Spiritually, local congregations give birth to Christians. Sometimes physically they give birth to Christians too, but more importantly spiritually. But more than just giving us spiritual birth, because how do you become a mother? Well, there's two ways. You have a child, or you adopt a child. And mothers who adopt and care for children are just as much mothers as those who have children. And the church not only gave us birth, it adopted us. For those of us who were not born into a Christian home, the adoption may feel more real than the birth. To be adopted is to be brought into a family. To need to be adopted is either to be orphaned or unwanted. And God, through the church, brought us into a family. We have been adopted by this congregation. Whether you whatever congregation you grew up in, and most churches today need to be concerned about adopting children. I don't mean infants. I mean that church growth no longer comes from the cradle roll. You guys ever used to have a cradle roll? You had a list of the children that were born in the church. I was at a church one time. They were celebrating their 100th anniversary as a church. And so they were pulling out all the old records. And they pulled out the cradle roll. These are the people that 50 years ago, this was the future of the church. Now, the church had been really big 50 years before. They had 30 names on the cradle roll. And of those 30 names, one was still attending that church. And I look out at this congregation, and I hope, we can't plan on having our grandchildren be the future of this church. Most of your grandchildren don't even live anywhere near this church. And there's not enough of them to plan, to guarantee that the church will continue. I served at a church in Newcastle, Indiana. Newcastle, Indiana, for years, the plan was you're born in Newcastle, you graduate from Newcastle schools, you go work in the Chrysler plant, and you died in Newcastle. And then the Chrysler plant closed. And the town's population decreased by almost 50% in the years following the closure of the Chrysler plant. And wouldn't you know that the church's attendance decreased also by almost 50%? What a coincidence! But I was dealing with people who were wondering, why have we decreased in attendance? So, well, let's look at the people who don't attend here anymore. Why don't they attend here anymore? Because they don't live here anymore. Let's look at our children. We had 5 seniors graduating that year. 4 of them were going to college. None of them were planning on coming back and working in Newcastle after they graduated from college. 1 of those 5 seniors stayed in Newcastle. And their families were so proud of them for being successful. They weren't angry that they left because they knew the opportunities for them to do what they wanted just weren't there. We have to plan as a church to adopt, to welcome in people from outside. Whether they come to us as Christians, seeking a new home, or as non-Christians seeking their first home. If we want revival in this church, we have to adopt children. How else is a church like our mother? Well, the first thing a mother does for her child after the child is born, there's 2 things that make a mother in biological terms. The first is to give birth, and the second is to feed the child. The church feeds us spiritual food. Paul talks about it. He says we start with mother's milk of spirituality. Jesus loves you. Jesus died for you. But then we get in, we grow, as we grow, we go from milk to solid foods. As we grow, we go deeper in our understanding. There were 2 things growing up that I knew I could not do to my mother. The first was I could not lie to her. Lying to her brought down her wrath like nothing else. And no matter what I had done that tempted me to lie about it, I knew the punishment for lying would be worse than whatever the punishment would be for what I had done. when she was sneaky, she would take my brother and I into the room and say, "Who did it? Who did what? You know if you did it." I'm pretty sure that half the time she found out about what we'd done just when we answered the question. She never let on. But I didn't lie to her. And the second thing I couldn't do to my mom was be late to dinner. Because if I was late, my food sat there and waited for me. It did not get reheated. It sat there and waited for me. And I think if we'd had a microwave, it still would not have gotten reheated. But I didn't want to miss any of her meals. I didn't want to be late for them. Back then it was safe for her to send my brother and I out to play after lunch and say, "Come home for supper. And don't come home until supper unless somebody's hurt." Didn't want to be late for her meals. I love the way she fed me. Maybe too much, but why do you come to church? You come to church to be fed spiritually. When I am preparing my sermons, my goal is to feed you spiritually. Maybe it's a word of encouragement. Maybe it's a word of correction. Maybe it's instruction. When people stop being fed by the church, they stop going to church. Back in the I went to a Disciples of Christ seminary. And in the Disciples of Christ in the 1970s, there were 2 million members of the Disciples of Christ Church in America. By 1990, there were 600,000 members of Disciples Christ Church in America. They lost almost 1.5 million members, almost 3/4 of their membership in 20 years. Until they did something unique. They decided, we got to figure out what's gone wrong. But instead of just sitting around and praying about it and having a bunch of people think and say, well, here's what we did wrong, they got a grant from Eli Lilly, and Eli Lilly was able to contact and get responses from about 700,000 people who had left the Disciples of Christ Church. Now, the church had their own ideas about, people left because they were too busy. People left because they got offended with somebody. They didn't like the pastor. The number one reason given by the people who responded to the survey was, the church wasn't feeding me anymore. One respondent wrote, I can get just as much fulfillment out of staying at home and listening to NPR as I get from the church. National Public Radio. They weren't being fed. Some of them said, I wish they'd actually said something I could get upset about. But what they did was so bland, I couldn't even get upset about it. It just didn't matter to me. church, when it's doing its job, feeds us. And it feeds us a food that our bodies crave, our souls crave, that helps us to grow, be healthy. And there's one more thing that the church, when it is doing its job, does. It is like our mothers when they do their jobs. The church loves us. I remember one church I was interviewing at, and I think it was the third church I ever served. And they got to the point in the interview where they stopped asking me questions. And they let me ask them questions. I always loved that part of the church, of the interview, because I got to decide if I really wanted to go there or not, if they invited me. So I said, what do you want your pastor to do? What is the most important? I said, you give me a job description. And there's a lot of things on this job description. What's the most important thing you want the pastor to do? And one of them said, I want the pastor to love us when we don't deserve it. I want the pastor to love us. People stay at a church that loves them, even when they don't deserve it. It is the number one responsibility of the church, is to love people. Love the members, love the strangers, love the community. Display that love in word and in deeds. And isn't that why we honor our mothers? Isn't that the most important thing our mothers do for us or did for us, was to love us? Back in the 60s, they did an experiment with monkeys. They took 2 orphan monkeys. And one of them was fed by a person with a hand puppet, with a monkey hand puppet. And that monkey hand puppet cared for that monkey. But that hand puppet had no milk. And on the other side of the cage was a wire mannequin of a monkey with a bottle. And that infant would cling to the hand puppet that caressed it, that gave it warmth and comfort, and stretch over as far as it could to try to reach the bottle. But it would starve before it would let go of that loving contact that it felt with that puppet. People say that food is one of our most basic needs. That experiment said love is a basic need, even greater than being fed. That instinctually choose to be loved over anything else. You all had good mothers. You all had or have mothers who loved you or love you. Yeah, they fed you too. Be glad for that. But that is the job of the church as well. More than feeding, more than caring for, more than comforting. The job of mothers and the job of the church is to love their children. And a closing hymn.